Chapter 16. I am not a second chance. I am a new beginning. I am not lucky you let me stay. You are lucky I chose to rise. The last chapter of my life had been defined by whispers of yes when I meant no, by apologizing for my existence, and by moving through the world like I was on borrowed time. Chapter 15 ended with me saying no for the first time and feeling the subtle but undeniable relief of staying loyal to myself. But saying no was just the beginning. The real shift came after. Because once you learn how to say no, the next question becomes, now, who do I become? For years, I thought the best I could hope for was being given a second chance. A chance to prove to people I wasn't the monster they imagined. A chance to show I wasn't still the same addict, the same criminal, the same failure they remembered. I thought if someone let me back into their lives, their workplaces, their homes, I should be grateful, no matter how little they offered me, no matter how they treated me. I lived like my very existence was charity, and I thought that made me humble. But it wasn't humility, it was hunger. Hunger for approval, hunger for belonging, hunger for someone to look at me and say, "You're worth keeping around." It took me a long time to realize that second chances are often cages in disguise, because when you live as someone's second chance, what you're really saying is, "I'll be whatever you need me to be to keep your acceptance." And that's not freedom. That's a leash. I'll never forget the night it happened. I was sitting on the floor of a friend's apartment, knees pulled to my chest, staring at the glow of my phone. This friend had been letting me crash for a while, but the help always came with strings. I felt like I was living on probation. One wrong move, one dirty dish, one late-night noise, and I'd be out. That night, a message lit up my screen. "You're lucky I even gave you a chance." It was short, cold, sent by someone I had once thought saw me as more than my past. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. It was like the air got sucked out of the room. But then, something surprising happened. The words didn't crush me. They clarified me. I realized I had spent years living like that text was true. Like I was lucky just to exist in someone's orbit, just to be tolerated, just to be allowed in. I had begged for scraps, disguised as second chances, and for what? To keep people around who believed their presence in my life was some kind of gift. I set the phone down on the carpet and sat in silence. My chest was tight. My throat burned. But under the ache, there was something else. A quiet fire. A voice rising up inside me that whispered, "No, I'm not lucky you gave me a chance. You're lucky I let you close to me while I was healing." I spoke it out loud, alone in that apartment, like a declaration. My voice shook, but it was mine. For the first time, I felt the shift in my bones. I wasn't a second chance. I was a new beginning. Here's the problem with the second chance mindset. It keeps you chained to the old you. Second chances imply that the goal is to redo what already failed, to go back to the same rooms, the same people, the same dynamics, and prove that you'll get it right this time. But I wasn't trying to re-enter an old story. That story nearly killed me. I didn't need to prove I could play by the old rules. I needed to build new ones. When people called me a second chance, what they really meant was, don't forget you're still on thin ice. Don't get too comfortable. don't forget you're replaceable. And I carried that message into every interaction. Job interviews, friendships, dating, family dinners. Everywhere I went, I moved with the desperate energy of someone trying to prove they deserved to be there. Smiling too hard, explaining too much, agreeing too quickly, shrinking so small that no one could accuse me of taking up too much space. I lived like my record, both the criminal one and the emotional one, was stamped on my forehead. I thought everyone saw me as a liability. What I didn't realize was that the biggest jailer wasn't them, it was me. I had accepted the identity of second chance as my ceiling. But that night, something snapped. I didn't want to be a rerun of my past anymore. I wanted to be a premiere, a debut, a story no one had seen yet. A second chance says, "Prove to me you won't fail again." A new beginning says, "You already transformed. Show up as who you are now." A second chance ties you to the old contract. A new beginning tears it up and writes a new one. A second chance keeps you begging for permission. A new beginning reminds you that you are the permission. I didn't want to be a second chance in anyone's eyes anymore. Not a friend's, not a partner's, not an employer's, not even my own. I wasn't here to repeat history. I was here to create it. After that text, I walked to the bathroom and stared at myself in the mirror. The reflection looking back wasn't perfect. I still had tired eyes. I still had regrets written in the lines of my face. But for the first time, I didn't see someone begging for entry into life. I saw someone who had already entered. The only question was I going to keep living like an intruder? Or was I finally going to act like I belonged here? I leaned on the sink, hands gripping the porcelain, and whispered, "I am not a second chance. I am a new beginning." And in that whisper, I felt something release. Here's the truth no one tells you. The moment you decide you're a new beginning, not everyone will celebrate. Some people will leave quietly. Their silence will cut deeper than words, but it will also set you free, because their absence makes space for people who can handle your presence. Others will fight back. They'll accuse you of arrogance. They'll say you've changed. They'll paint your boundaries as betrayal. But what they're really saying is, we liked you better when you didn't know your worth. And that's okay. Let them. You're not here to audition for anyone anymore. Claiming myself as a new beginning didn't mean I suddenly became fearless. It meant I started practicing courage in small daily ways, walking into job interviews without shrinking my story, applying for housing even when I knew my record might be a barrier, telling people this is who I am now without flinching, saying no and not explaining it like a courtroom defense, choosing relationships where my worth wasn't a negotiation. Each of these choices felt small, but they built something massive inside me. Trust. Trust in myself. Trust that I didn't need external validation to keep going. One afternoon, I walked outside after a meeting. Same street, same weather, same traffic noise. But everything felt different. My body wasn't hunched anymore. My eyes weren't scanning for judgment. For once, I wasn't walking to escape something or prove something. I was just walking, present, grounded, here. That was the first time I realized the old version of me had truly died. The apologetic, shrinking, "thank you for letting me exist" version was gone. And what stood in his place wasn't a second chance. It was a whole new story, one I was finally ready to write. But here's the thing about declaring yourself a new beginning. The world doesn't change overnight. People still judged, doors still closed, old voices still tried to whisper me back into smallness. And there came a day, not long after I declared myself new, where I had to face the ultimate test, a moment where I stood in front of someone who only saw me as my past, and I had to decide whether I would shrink back into second chance or step fully into new beginning. That's where the real fight began. The declaration came easy when I was alone in front of the mirror, saying, I am not a second chance. I am a new beginning. Felt powerful in the safety of silence. But the real test wasn't in whispers to myself. The real test was in the world that still thought it had me figured out. It didn't take long before the first test came. I walked into a building one morning, resume in hand, dressed in the best clothes I could put together. I had practiced my lines, steadied my breathing, convinced myself I could handle whatever they asked. But as soon as I sat down, the conversation shifted. The manager looked at my paperwork, then at me, then back at the screen in front of him. He cleared his throat and said the words I had grown to hate. It says here you have a record. I nodded. Yes. The silence that followed stretched into something unbearable. His expression hardened, his tone changed. In that moment, I could feel myself shrinking. My old reflex came rushing back. Explain yourself, apologize. Make yourself small so he doesn't feel uncomfortable. I almost did. I almost said, but I've changed. But I'm trying. But please give me a second chance. But then I caught myself. I remembered the mirror. I remembered the text message. I remembered the fire in my chest when I declared I wasn't a second chance. So instead I said, yes, I do. But I'm not here to repeat who I was. I'm here to build what I've become. I'm not asking you to ignore my past. I'm asking you to see that it's not my future. He blinked, surprised, maybe even impressed. I didn't get the job. But for the first time, I didn't leave feeling like I had failed. I left with my head high because I didn't beg. I didn't shrink. I didn't sell myself as a second chance. I presented myself as a new beginning, and that was worth more than any paycheck. The next test came closer to home. It was during a family gathering. The laughter was loud, the food was spread across the table, but the tension was quiet and heavy. Someone, a cousin who always had something to say, leaned back in his chair and said, you know, we're all glad you're doing better. But let's be real. Once someone's messed up that bad, you never really change. You just try to look like you did. The words hit the table like glass shattering. A few people laughed nervously. A few looked down at their plates. The old me would have stayed quiet, maybe forced a laugh, maybe left the room early. But not this time. I set my fork down, looked him in the eye, and said, you're right about one thing. I'll never be who I was before, but you're wrong about the rest. I didn't just try to look like I changed. I did change. And if you can't see that yet, that's okay. But don't confuse your inability to accept it with my inability to live it. The room went silent. My hands were trembling under the table. My heart was pounding. But I felt powerful. Not because I had won the argument, but because I hadn't betrayed myself. That was the new beginning in action. Not every test ended in applause. Some ended in loss. When you stop living as a second chance, you stop tolerating relationships that only exist because you're apologizing for who you were. And when you stop apologizing, people who relied on your apology to feel superior don't know what to do with you. Some friends drifted. Some family members kept their distance. Some people talked behind my back, saying things like, "He thinks he's better than us now." And for a while, that hurt. I wanted to chase them, to explain, to prove. But then I realized every time I considered going back to prove myself, I was walking toward being a second chance again. And that wasn't me anymore. So I let them go. And for every person who left, space opened for someone new. People who saw me for who I was becoming, not who I used to be. People who didn't see me as a liability, but as a partner, a friend, a brother, a counselor, a human. Here's what no one tells you about becoming a new beginning. Most of it isn't loud. It's not about big speeches or dramatic gestures. It's about the quiet, consistent work of living in alignment with who you are now. It looked like waking up early to journal instead of scrolling, saying no to people who drained me, even when it felt uncomfortable, choosing jobs that aligned with my integrity, even if they paid less, showing up to meetings even when shame told me to skip, smiling at myself in the mirror, even on days I didn't fully believe it. Every choice was like laying a brick. Alone, they didn't look like much, but together they were building a foundation, a new life, a new beginning. But let me be honest, there were nights I almost broke, nights when the rejection letters piled up, when the loneliness felt unbearable, when the voices in my head whispered, "See, you're still the same. No one really believes in you. You're still just the old you dressed up in new words." And I'd be lying if I said I didn't consider going back. Back to numbing, back to old crowds, back to saying yes to anything just to feel wanted. The pull of the familiar is always strongest when the new hasn't fully formed yet. But in those moments, I remembered the truth. Halfway healing is just another way of staying sick. So I stayed. I chose the uncomfortable silence over the destructive noise. I chose the awkwardness of rebuilding over the false comfort of repeating. And slowly, the pull of the old life weakened. The more I lived as a new beginning, the more my identity shifted. I was no longer the man begging for forgiveness. I was the man offering guidance. I was no longer the addict running from himself. I was the counselor reminding others they could face themselves. I was no longer the felon waiting for scraps of grace. I was the advocate demanding dignity. And the most important shift of all, I stopped calling myself a second chance. I stopped letting others call me that. I started introducing myself to myself differently. I am not what I did. I am what I survived. I am not who I was. I am who I am becoming. But here's the thing. Once you claim yourself as a new beginning, the tests don't stop. They get bigger. Because life has a way of asking, do you really mean it? And the biggest test of all was still waiting for me, the moment where I had to stand in a room full of people who only knew the old me and decide whether I would shrink into their memory or rise into my destiny. The hardest test of a new beginning isn't the quiet moments. It isn't journaling at midnight or saying no to someone who drains you. It isn't even walking away from the people who only saw you as your past. The hardest test is standing in the very room where your old self once lived, where your mistakes were loud, where your name was stained, and deciding whether you'll collapse into memory or rise into destiny. And one day, that moment came for me. It was a community event, the kind that gathers everyone, the people who knew me at my lowest, the ones who whispered about me in grocery stores, the ones who had already written me off as that guy. When I walked in, I could feel the eyes, some curious, some judgmental, some downright hostile. The air was thick with unspoken words. What's he doing here? Who does he think he is? Didn't he mess up his life already? For a second, my body wanted to betray me. My shoulders started to slump. My chest tightened. My inner critic whispered, just keep your head down. Don't draw attention. Don't let them see you. But then I remembered that's the language of a second chance, and I am not that anymore. So I straightened. I lifted my chin. I walked with a pace that said, I belong here because I belong anywhere I decide to be. At some point, the host asked me to stand up and share. My heart dropped. This was it. The moment where the room would decide whether I was still the criminal, the addict, the failure, or something else. I stood. My palms were sweating. My legs felt heavy, but I spoke anyway. I know some of you know me from who I used to be, and I won't hide from that. Yes, I made mistakes. Yes, I went down paths that hurt me and others, but what I want you to hear today is this. I'm not asking for a second chance. I'm not begging you to forget the past. I'm here because I've become something new. I am not the old me dressed up in new clothes. I am not the same man waiting for your approval. I am a new beginning, with or without your permission. The room went silent, dead silent. Some people looked away, some crossed their arms, but others, the ones who knew what it felt like to be erased, nodded. Some even teared up. And in that silence I realized I didn't need their applause. I didn't need their acceptance. I needed my own voice, steady and clear, reminding me of the truth. Afterward, a few people approached me. One shook my hand quietly and said, I've been where you were. Thank you. Another whispered, I needed to hear that tonight. Not everyone was convinced. Some walked past me without a word. Some muttered under their breath. But that didn't matter anymore. For the first time in my life, the weight of other people's opinions slid off my back. Because I finally understood my worth was never theirs to decide. That night, lying in bed, I replayed the moment over and over. Not out of shame, but out of awe. The old me would have begged. The old me would have apologized for existing. The old me would have taken whatever scraps of validation were offered. But the new me, I had spoken with authority. Not arrogance, authority. The authority that comes from survival, from healing, from building something inside that no one can take away. And that's when it hit me. My story wasn't about getting back what I lost. My story was about creating something that never existed before. I wasn't here to be the redemption arc in someone else's narrative. I wasn't here to fit back into the mold people tried to force me into. I was here to write an entirely new story, one that couldn't be compared to the past because it was built on different soil. Here's what I've learned. When you step into being a new beginning, you won't get universal applause. Some people will never forgive you, no matter how much you grow. Some will keep you in their minds as the villain, because that's easier than confronting the fact that people can change. Some will resent your progress because it forces them to look at the parts of themselves they've ignored. And that's okay, because a new beginning isn't about convincing everyone else. It's about convincing yourself. That night, I wrote in my journal, I am not living my life as an apology anymore. I am not waiting for permission. I am not a second chance. I am a new beginning. And if the world can't handle that, then the world can adjust, because I'm not shrinking again. I closed the notebook, sat in the dark, and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not relief, not happiness, not even pride. It was power. Quiet, steady power. The kind that doesn't come from control, but from freedom. And yet, I also knew this. Being a new beginning comes with responsibility. You can't just declare it. You have to live it. You have to walk it out, day after day, even when no one is clapping. Even when no one believes in you but you, especially then. That's when the next call came, the one that would force me to decide whether this new beginning was just words on paper or a way of life. A chance to step into the biggest role I'd ever been asked to play. A chance to lead, to guide, to be the healer I once needed. But it came with risk, because stepping into that role meant putting myself in front of the very system that once broke me. And I had to ask myself, was I ready?